You know, when you dive into The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, there's this incredible feeling you get. It doesn't feel like you're just reading a story. It feels like you're uncovering some piece of real ancient history that the world just happened to forget. So, the question is, how on earth did one man create a world that feels so deep, so real? And that's really the central mystery of Tolkien's work, isn't it? This wasn't just a few books. It was a whole world, complete with its own complex timelines, its own cultures, super detailed maps. I mean, how is it even possible for one person to build something on that scale? Well, the answer is actually simpler and way more fascinating than you might think. And here it is. This is the key to everything. For J.R.R. Tolkien, the stories weren't the starting point. The languages were. The epic sagas of elves and dwarves and hobbits, all of it was created to give his invented languages a history, a culture, a place to live. So, to really understand Tolkien, we have to start with his number one passion. It was something he even called his secret vice. And no, it wasn't storytelling, it was language itself. This wasn't just a little hobby for him, it was the engine driving his entire creative life. You see, Tolkien was a world-class philologist. Now, philology is more than just learning languages. It's like being a language detective. You dissect them, you trace how they change and evolve over hundreds of years, almost like a biologist tracking evolution. And he took all of that academic discipline and pointed it straight at his own imaginary world. And he was especially obsessed with this idea called phonoaesthetics, which is basically the study of how sounds feel. He truly believed that the sound of a word itself could be beautiful or ugly, that some sounds just felt noble, while others felt evil. And he used this idea to literally build the moral fabric of Middle-earth. And hey, don't just take my word for it. Tolkien laid it out himself. He wasn't just coming up with cool names for his characters. No, he was building entire languages from scratch. And then he'd ask himself, okay, what kind of people would speak a language that sounds like this? What would their history be like? The entire story literally grew out of the sounds of the words. And get this, he didn't just make one Elvish language. He created a whole family of them. Take Quenya, for instance. It's based on Finnish, so it's very vowel-heavy and musical. Think of it as the elves' ancient ceremonial Latin. But then you've got Sindarin, which is based on Welsh. It's more consonant-heavy and was used as their everyday language. That kind of linguistic depth is exactly why Middle-earth feels so authentic. Its history is layered, just like in our world. But, a world isn't just about grammar and rules. It needs a soul. It needs a heart. And for Tolkien, that soul was forged in the fires of his own incredible life experiences. Experiences of profound beauty, but also of devastating loss and the absolute horror of war. Tolkien's imagination was really shaped by these two giant opposing forces. On one hand, you had Sirhol, this perfect, idyllic English countryside where he grew up. That became the blueprint for the peaceful Shire. And on the other hand, you had the Battle of the Somme in World War I. The mud, the industrial slaughter he witnessed, that became the hellscape of Mordor. His world has both heaven and hell in it, because, in a very real way, he lived through both. You see, before the war, Tolkien had his own fellowship. It was called the TCBS, a small group of brilliant friends who were going to change the world with their art. But the war just completely shattered that dream. In 1916, in the span of just 6 months, 2 of his 3 best friends were killed. And it was right after this, while he was back in England recovering from trench fever, that Tolkien first started writing the stories that would become his legendary. The cost was just devastating. Half of this fellowship, this band of brothers who were supposed to do great things together, were just wiped out. So when you read about fellowship, about loss, about carrying on when it feels impossible, those weren't just abstract ideas for Tolkien. That was his actual life. And then there's this. In the very last letter he ever wrote, Tolkien's friend Geoffrey Smith basically gave him a mission. He charged him to say the things I have tried to say long after I am not there to say them. Smith was passing the torch. He was placing their shared artistic dream right on Tolkien's shoulders. Suddenly, creating Middle-earth wasn't just a passion project. It was a duty to his fallen friends. So after the war, Tolkien's life became much quieter. He became a professor, first at Leeds and then at Oxford. But his day job wasn't some separate thing from his secret vice. Oh no. It was the laboratory where he sharpened all the tools he needed to build his world. I mean, his career was just this deep, deep dive into the oldest roots of the English language. He was tracing word histories for the Oxford English Dictionary. As a professor of Anglo-Saxon, he was living inside ancient epics like Beowulf. All this academic work gave him this incredible, unique insight into how myths and languages are born, which he then basically reverse engineered for Middle-earth. He was so influential, he actually changed the whole curriculum at Oxford. He pushed for more focus on the history of language, on philology, and less on modern literature. He really believed that to understand English, you had to understand its ancient, mythic past. So in a way, he was teaching the very same principles he was using to build his own world. Okay, so we've got the building blocks, right? A deep academic love of language and a life profoundly shaped by war. But the books that everybody knows, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, they're actually just the tip of a much, much bigger iceberg. 17 years. That's how long it took him to write the sequel to The Hobbit. Can you believe that? After The Hobbit was a surprise hit, his publishers, of course, wanted another one. But for Tolkien, it wasn't as simple as just making up a new adventure. Everything had to fit perfectly with the massive, unseen history he'd already created. He couldn't just invent things, he had to discover them within the world he'd already built. And here is probably the biggest reveal of all. The Lord of the Rings is really just the final chapter of a much, much larger saga. Tolkien's true life's work, the thing he was most passionate about, was the Silmarillion, the ancient myths and legends from the first age of Middle-earth. That was the masterpiece he always dreamed of publishing. But the project was just so huge that he was still working on it when he died. The only reason we know about it today is thanks to his son, Christopher. Christopher dedicated his entire life to sifting through his father's mountains of notes. He published not just the Silmarillion, but an enormous 12-volume series called The History of Middle-earth, which shows you the entire incredible creative process. So let's pull all of this together. What's the big takeaway from Tolkien's amazing life? How did he manage this literary miracle? It's this. Middle-earth feels real because its foundations are real. The way languages evolve, the way myths develop over time, Tolkien used the actual scientific principles of his academic profession to build his fantasy world.
His real legacy is just staggering. He took fantasy and gave it a depth and a seriousness it never had before. He basically treated his own creation like an archaeological site, digging up its history layer by layer. And he proved that creating mythology isn't just about telling stories. It's tied to the same part of us that creates language in the first place.
In the end, that's what Middle-earth is. It's not just a backdrop for a quest. It's a linguistic monument. A monument to his friends who never came home from the war, to the ancient myths he adored, and more than anything, to the power of words themselves. The story is just the front door, inviting you into this vast, beautiful house he built.
So that leaves us with one last thought. After everything you've heard, when you open one of his books, are you just reading a story that a very clever man made up? Or are you maybe doing what Tolkien would have wanted you to do? Discovering the lost fragments of a beautiful world that feels so real it just had to have existed somewhere a long, long time ago.